Hello, Shansi. வாழ்த்துக்கள். Greetings. This is Nedimaran.
We are delighted to be a part of your story. Our long line of faculty fellows from Lady Doak have returned to Madurai to enrich lives of students and faculty and our community at large. I remember so well Zoe teaching the resident faculty a square dance to entertain the students at a Teachers' Day celebration way back in 1986. That was the year I set foot in Lady Doak College. Let our friendship continue for generations to come.
As an ethnomusicologist of South Asia, the Shansi experience inspired and propelled my career in the study of Tamil music. It was the beginning of friendships that have lasted my entire adult life. But one of them stands out. That's Beulah David Rajkumar, professor and head of the Department of Physics at Lady Doak College. When I came to Madurai as a Shansi rep in 1985, Beulah was part of a gang of young lecturers who took me in, shared food with me in their mess, taught me language and songs, took me to Tamil films. Beulah and I became closer when she was a faculty fellow to Oberlin in the mid-1990s. When I came back to Madurai in 2008 to make my first documentary film on the Parai drum of the Tamil Dalits, Beulah, her husband Leslie, and daughter Lydia opened their home to me to return to whenever I needed it as I traveled around the state filming. I'm grateful for the love of their immediate and extended family, and I hope our friendship lasts for years to come.
My introduction to the Oberlin Shansi program in Madurai was in 1952, when Dick Dudley, Joe Elder with Baby Shanti, the first reps to go to Madurai, came up to the hill station of Kodaikanal. I was then a senior at Kodaikanal School. Oberlin was high on my list of colleges, and so I sought them out. When I and several of my classmates went on a short biking camping trip, we invited Dick and Joe to come along. They joined us for one night at Berejim Lake. I have a picture taken then of Dick and Joe evidently waiting for supper to cook. The seed was sown, and 5 years later, Shar Penfield and I were appointed reps to Hislop College in Nagpur. We enjoyed our stay there, but were pleased when the Shansi trustees decided to establish a permanent program in Madurai. If I were to name a mentor, it would certainly be Charlie. Shar and I were married after our year back at Oberlin, and some years later were asked to go to Madurai to serve as senior reps. Again, Charlie was there to offer counsel and advice, and his friends at American College and Lady Doak College welcomed us and were a huge support during our time there. While it lasted, we thoroughly enjoyed our time in Madurai, especially when we could meet with friends with common interests, as when 12 present and former reps gathered at our home in 1970, or when we welcomed the Spidell family from Taiwan. Shansi was a great experience.
I'll talk about Charlie Ryerson. Charles Ryerson, Charlie to many of us. Oh, he loved Tamil. Its literature, culture, politics, Dravidian movement, people, food, rituals. He was one of us. A great friend of the college as a trustee. I recall his wit, irresistible charm, resounding laughter, his love of tomato chutney and sambar. From the young brigade of the 80s, Stephen Bloom stands out as a family friend. To Mangai, my wife, and Rajiv, my son.
The person I want to speak about in terms of one of the relationships I had as a Shansi rep is Rajiv Nedumaran. Of course, I was a 22-year-old Oberlin graduate, and there were all of the renowned and famous Oberlin fellows who had come from American College. Abraham, Nairji, and of course, Nedumaran. Rajiv was Nedumaran's son, and I was only barely older than Rajiv, and he was an MCOM student at American College at the time. And although I worked with his father and worked with his father's colleagues, it was Rajiv who in some ways was my age peer, who really introduced me to so much of India and so much of Madurai.
Stephen Bloom was earlier a Shansi rep to India, and I met him in a chaya shop in Madurai. Later, when I visited Boston, I had the wonderful chance of staying with him for a week, and it was the most enjoyable time I had. We chatted and discussed anything and everything. I still remember the time we went to the Boston Museum, how I loved to touch at a mummy displayed there, and immediately a loud voice on the loudspeaker blared, "You're not supposed to touch the exhibits." And Stephen was wide with laughter. I still am in touch with him and share about our lives.
I would like to acknowledge and thank my senior fellow when I arrived in 2000, Thomas Pruxma. He had already been there for 2 years, and he stayed on for several months longer in order to show me the ropes. I know that when I arrived, I didn't have a sense of how to approach the study of Tamil or what it meant to make a friend or visit a village. And Tom was a very thoughtful person, and he really helped show me some of the possibilities of this place called Madurai and the state of Tamil Nadu, many of which I couldn't have imagined otherwise.
23 years ago, my fellow fellowship recipient Aparna Jain and I were able to study Tamil with a wonderful teacher named Dr. K.V. Ramakodi. Aparna went on to study Hindi with him, and I found myself unexpectedly and increasingly fascinated with Tamil poetry. 5 years later, I was able to get a Fulbright grant to go back and stay with him in his house and study, among other things, the classical Tamil masterpiece on ethics, power, and love, the Tirukural, or in short, the Kural, using his favorite edition, which includes all of the old commentaries. In the years since, when we spoke on the phone or when I was able to visit him in his house, he would say, "Wouldn't it be nice if someone did a proper literary translation of the Kural, using all the old commentaries that you and I read together?" And I'd always say, "That would be something nice for someone, sure, of course." It never occurred to me that that someone could be me until a dozen years later, it suddenly did. And on a whim, I started translating a verse a day. And after I had a few chapters, I mentioned to my teacher that I had started this little project. And he said, "Oh, good. You finally got the hint." I was able to return to Madurai to be with Dr. Ramakodi and to go through the entire manuscript with him before he died in 2019. And so it is thanks to this relationship, this friendship, that Shansi first made possible 23 years ago, that my translation of the Kural is going to be published next month by the wonderful Beacon Press. When I asked Dr. Ramakodi to translate the phrase, "joining worlds," he thought for a long time and came up with Uravu Virayum Ulagu. The world longs for relatedness. A couple days later, he realized that without intending it, he had composed the line in the same poetic meter, the same poetic form as the Tirukural. I am honored and grateful and humbled to be part of this interweaving of worlds.
When I think about my experience at Lady Doak College as a fellow, there were so many people that welcomed me and supported my curiosity in Madurai and the Tamil language. So it's really hard to pick just one personal story. But one relationship that was super important to me was with my friend Nisha, who I actually met through Shansi's deputy director, Ted Samuel. I think whenever you move somewhere new, you always look for that person who will be your entry point to really explore the new place. And Nisha was definitely that person for me. Nisha was my best friend in Madurai, and she was just always there for me. She helped me get more comfortable riding the electric scooter around town. She helped me tie my sari on numerous occasions so that we could crash wedding receptions together. And she just always had the best recommendations for restaurants and things to do. We also took Bollywood dance classes together. And I remember one time, one of our classmates was kind of curious about my living situation and asked me, what do you do on the weekends since you live alone and you don't have any family here? So don't you get lonely? And I responded, well, I just hang out with Nisha all weekend, so I don't get lonely. I miss her a lot.
I have a special relationship that I cherish with 3 of Oberlin Shansi reps, Vanessa, Olivia and Kate, and also Gavin and Ted. There's one thing that I would like to share that I appreciate, that I see amongst all these 5 people, and that is the way they spend their time. They invest their time with students, making a safe space so that communication happens, real communication happens.
I would like to share my thoughts on Louise Edwards, the returned fellow in 2018-19. Louise was a friend and guide that we had in Oberlin for all the housemates in the Shansi house. I first met her when she came to receive me at the airport with Haura and Fen, and I was immediately impressed because she had such a friendly demeanor and she made me feel so welcome. I'm someone who is very hesitant by nature. I struggle making friends. For someone like me, she made me feel that I can be myself, and she gave me the company that I needed, even without me asking for it. And the trip to US was my first solo trip. So staying away from my family and staying away from my loved ones, though difficult in the beginning, was an experience that helped me grow as a person. And I thank Oberlin Shansi for that.
I applied to Shansi because of a random postcard sent to me by Leslie Kennedy, the previous year's Shansi rep to Lady Doak College in Madurai. She told me that they were reopening the connection to American College, and she thought of me. Once I was there in Madurai, I felt right at home, owing to Leslie, her housemate Paula Richmond, and all the Madurai Karanga who remembered the previous reps with such great fondness. One of those people was G. Devarajan, a professor at American College, who sent his son Chakravarti, or Babu, around for a visit. Babu and I were about the same age and began to pal around town. Soon thereafter, Babu introduced me to his friend Shantaram, an alum of American College, and together we became a happy trio. Thank you, Shansi, for bringing us all together.
One of the first and most impactful people that I met while I moved there was the late, great Didi Contractor. I met her through the context of my senior fellow, Anya. She was the designer and landlady, architect really, of Anya, the cottage Anya lived in, and next door neighbor. And I remember going to meet Didi and just being in awe of this woman who was, well into her retirement age, but still designing houses, still living this intense life that she wanted to be living, and always had so much to say about everything. I really came to appreciate how her commitment to living each day to the fullest, to learning, to meeting people, to not being afraid to change her career when she was at more advanced age and continuing to pursue it.
My trip to Oberlin was the first outside the country, and there too I made it all alone. That was a big life changer for me. Deb and Carl, Jim and Anhelm, and Yukiko were all there to make it possible for me to have my stay at Oberlin comfortable. I was transformed because of my visit to Oberlin.
Dr. Mary Kurtz retired from her teaching profession just that year, and she had all her time to spend with me, to guide me in my doctoral study. To all my academic feats and accomplishments, I owe a great deal to Oberlin Shansi, to Deb and Carl for their guidance, to Jim and Anne for their kindness, to Mary Kurtz for her intellectual input. When I left Oberlin, Dr. Mary Kurtz almost emptied her library of her books on Margaret Atwood and gifted them to me. Jim and Anne helped me in packing those books, and Carl and Deb helped me in shipping them. Those 98 books, the rich treasure that I brought from Oberlin, adorn the shelves of the Library of the Department of English and are put to good use by my students.
32 years have passed by since I landed up in Oberlin. My high points in Oberlin are enjoying lovely moments in the company of Carl and Debbie, basking in the warmth of maternal love in Peg Leonard's home, buoying up in the boundless love of May and Matt Logan, who took me home umpteen times to Cleveland, the Indian Music Festival and Amish countryside, etc. Rubbing shoulders in the Asia House kitchen with Shansi returned reps, preparing Indian food for the Asian Food Festival. Interacting in academic sessions with Pat Day, Gloria Watkins, Jane Cooper, Nicholas Jones, and Calvin Hurton. Friendly sessions with my EXCO class students on Indian culture back home, cooking Indian cuisine with my wife or visiting Shansi reps in my cozy little house. In sum, my love affair with Shansi lasted not just a year, but continues forever.
If you think I'm speaking good English today, I must say the credit goes to Shansi. In 1986, Peter Mayer from Boulder, Colorado, came as a Shansi rep, and we became very, very good friends. And we started a band called the Glass Bangles. He was also there when my first daughter was born, with me in the hospital giving me moral support. Later, he and his wife Amanda Bickle became the godparent for my daughter, and we continue to do a lot of music together even now, though we are 10,000 miles apart.
I want to tell you a little bit about my friend Shaker, J. Rajasekaran. I met Shaker my very first day in Madurai when I stepped off the train onto the platform. I believe that we played music later that same evening. He saw me carrying a guitar, and we have formed a friendship, started around music, but it's really blossomed to way more than that over many, many, many years. And we are still very close friends to this day. And so I've got a few photos and a song that we worked on together. I hope you enjoy it.
கைது செய்யுமே நகப்புல கம்பி என்ன சொல்ல